Good morning. My name is Wong, student ID 2108697. In this presentation, I will briefly explain my competence MGT 3024 final assessment, which consists of Section 1, an analysis of a moral issue, and Section 2, a critical reflections on AI ethical responses. Starting with the Section 1, for the first part, I apply Rose prima facie duty theory. I focus on three duties: non-beneficence, beneficence, and justice. I found that the last fashion industry creates an ethical conflict because consumers benefit from affordable clothing while workers may experience poor working conditions and low wages. And the environment can suffer from pollution and textile waste. Therefore, I concluded that commercial interests should not have priority when low prices depends on serious and preventable harm. Next, I apply Kant's second formulations of the categorical imperative. Kant argues that people should always be treated as an in themselves rather than simply as a mean. I apply these mainly to workers, arguing that companies should not treat workers simply as cheap laborers for profit. Consumers are also important because they should have sufficient information to make informed decisions. Third, I discuss ethical realism. Different cultures and economic situations can lead people to have different ethical views. For example, lower-income consumer may prioritize affordable clothing, while workers or environmental groups may prioritize labor rights and sustainability. However, I argue that cultural differences should help us understand different perspectives, but should not be used to justify serious exploitations or preventable harm. Finally, my own position. My own position is that fashion is ethically unacceptable when affordability depends on serious and preventable harm to workers or the environment. Companies have the greatest responsibility because they have greater control over productions and supply chain. Therefore, affordability should not be achieved by treating workers or the environment as costs that can simply be scrapped for profit. Moving to the section 2, I used Gemini to critically examine the moral issues surrounding the Johor River pollution incidents involving Hub Ike Evergreen. For prompt 1, I asked the AI to identify the moral issue and explain what the right thing to do. The AI identified corporate responsibility, environmental injustice, the right to clean water, harm to local communities, and regulatory responsibility. However, my reflections was that the AI was too quick to conclude that Help Ike Evergreen was negligence because the article itself did not provide enough evidence to show whether the incident was negligence or an accident. For prompt 2, develop this issue further by distinguishing intentional harms, negligence, and accidental harm. I agree that this distinction was useful because moral responsibility depends on whether the company failed to exercise reasonable care. The article showed the physical connection between the bond failure and pollution, but does not provide enough technical evidence to prove negligence. For prompt 3, I use stakeholder theory. The AI identify fishermen, orang asli communities, residents, the government, water authorities, Singapore, and the natural environment. My criticism was the AI placed strong emphasis on vulnerable stakeholder, but did not sufficiently examine competing stakeholder interests. For the prompt 4, I applied utilitarianism. The AI compared the economic benefits or sand mining with the environmental, social, and financial harms. I found this useful because it considers the overall consequences, social and financial harms. I found this useful because it considers the overall consequences, but I also noted that utilitarianism focuses mainly on outcome and may not fully address moral duties that as this regardless of economic benefit. Prompt 5, I apply the rights and duties approach. The key issue was whether the politicians violated rights to clean water, health, and livelihood. I agree that these rights should not simply be treated for economic benefits. However, I question the assumption that the company automatically has an absolute duty to pay when the incidents may have been accidental. For the prompt 6, considers justice and fairness. I argue that victims should not bear the cost of industrial pollution when they had no control over the activity. However, I also recognize that responsibility should be distributed fairly between the company, government, and other stakeholders, especially if negligence has not been proven. For the prompt 7, distinguishes legal responsibility from moral responsibility. My conclusion was that following the legal minimum does not automatically means an action is morally acceptable. A company may comply with the law while still having broader moral duties to prevent serious harm. Prompt 8, I challenge this conclusion. I considered a situation where Hub Ike Evergreen followed the reasonable safety standards and the failure was generally unforeseeable in that situation. I conclude that the company should not be considered morally blameworthy. However, causal responsibility and responsibility for repairing harm can still be different. From 9, then I considered fair compensation. I conclude that compensation should go beyond measurable financial loss. It should also consider livelihood loss, environmental damage, culture impacts, and long-term risks. Finally, Room 10 brought all the previous analysis together. Our final judgment is balanced. If negligence is not proven, how I Evergreen should still participate in repairing the environmental and economic damage, while cognitive sanctions should depend on the investigation. If negligence is proven, stronger sanctions and greater accountability would be justified. Overall, this assessment helped me understand that ethical responsibility is not always seen as legal responsibility or moral blameworthiness. My main conclusion is that protecting affected communities, repairing harm, and preventing future environment damage are essentials, but the level of punishment should depend on the evidence of negligence. Thank you.